Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video, I'm finally getting around to doing an Australian Survivor casting video, where here I'll be talking about a much talked about theme, that being Australian Survivor AU versus USA. Essentially, I'll be creating two tribes of returning players, one having 12 players from Australian Survivor, while the other one having 12 players from Survivor US. Now, the reason I'm doing this Australian Survivor version of this list is because I do feel like Australian Survivor is the version of the show that is the most likely to do something like this, where something like Survivor SA is a show that I don't really feel like they're particularly likely to be getting international players coming to their show, and then Survivor US, I think, clearly doesn't care about other versions of their show, to where I think AU is the happy medium here, to where I could see them doing this. I think if they were to do it, I do think they would exclusively stick to the AU versus USA division there. So that will be running through the histories of both of these shows and talking about who I decided to put on my cast for a season like this. Now, I did try to keep this cast semi-realistic. Like, while there are a couple people here and there that, again, you could maybe squint at, I do feel like for the most part, I do feel like this is a cast that I could reasonably see Australian Survivor actually put together. So with that, let's start by talking about the Australian Survivor side of things first, where I'll be running through the players I put on the list here in chronological order of their first appearance. Now, from season 1, people that I did consider that didn't make it on are the likes of a Phoebe, who I think would have been fun, but didn't quite make the cut. Brooke is someone that probably would have been more in consideration if she wasn't just recently starting a family, but even then probably would have barely made it on the list. Flick is someone I greatly considered as well. Lee is someone that I always expected to get a second chance after he left All Stars, but never seemed to be in contention again for some reason. But as for the people that did make it on my cast, so from season 1, the first person that I think you can expect on a season like this would be the winner of the first season, that being Christy. Now, Christy is someone that we know was in contention for Heroes vs. Villains and dropped out at the last second. And I do feel like for a grander season like this AU versus USA season, I do feel like for the Australian Survivor players in particular, they would try to get the best field of players that they could. And while Christy is not the greatest player in my mind, I do feel like having a former winner and one that seems to be willing to play again, and also is the first winner of their show, seemed to be a very probable outcome here, so I did put Christy on the cast. Now, the other person from season 1 that I put on is one that is a bit more questionable, as it's a bit more of a question mark on whether or not this person even wants to play again. I feel like if he were to, I feel like it would be for this season, and that person is Nick. Now, again, Nick is someone that has kind of gone on and off on whether he would want to play again. However, I do feel like an Australian Survivor versus US season is the type of season that he would say yes to. Obviously, he is a massive fan. And I do feel like if there weren't other complications in the way, I do feel like he would really want to play against some of these legends of Survivor US, while also playing against a really strong field of AU players. So that I did put Nick on. Now, from season 2, and the main considerations here, and it being someone like a Sarah, who has seemingly been in the running for returnee seasons, though has never quite made it on, and I kind of just assumed that she wouldn't really make it onto this season either. But again, while she was in consideration, I didn't put her on here. I also consider someone like an AK, who I feel like kind of in this Nick ballpark of probably not really wanting to come back for most seasons, but I feel like this is the type of season that he would want to come back for. However, I feel like he kind of fought with the same spot with Nick, and I feel like Nick is probably more likely to come back. I also considered Henry, who was definitely in consideration here, though kind of felt like he was probably a bit too similar to some of the other guys on this cast, to where I decided to leave him off. Also left off Luke, who would have definitely made the list here if I had any semblance of thought of Luke wanting to play again. However, I never really got the sense that Luke would want to play again. Like, I feel like if Luke wanted to play again, he probably would have played again since his second appearance. Now, I do think if I had more people to work with here, I would have probably put Luke on the cast just anyway, but with only 6 guys to pick here, I decided that doubt there was enough to not put him on. And I did also consider Mark, who obviously goes on the Win Blood vs. Water, but didn't put him on as one. I don't know how likely it is that he wants to play again, but also, because might as well get to it now, I did put Sam on the cast. And Sam is a player that I think is very likely to come back if she wants it. Now, I think whether or not she wants it is a bit up in the air, as I do feel like her previous experience with Blood vs. Water was probably not the greatest. However, I do feel like she's the type of player that I could definitely see AU bringing back, and I feel like if she wants to come back, I feel like she would be here, and I feel like she's of the caliber, and I think she would be really fitting on this sort of cast. I think she is a very solid player, one that I would have a decent amount of faith in, where I think seeing her match up with some of the US players seems pretty apt. So considering how likely I feel like it is that we're probably going to see her again at some point, I did put her on the cast here. The other person is someone that has been consideration for seasons in the past, just had to turn it down due to work obligations, and really it was between Sarah and this person for the spot on the list. However, I just feel like this person fit the cast a bit more, and that person is Tessa. Now, straight with a lot of this cast, what I end up doing is creating these parallels between the US tribe and the Australian tribe, and I did feel like that greatly factored into why Tessa is on here over Sarah, as I do feel like she kind of fits in line with the people that end up being cast on the US side of things. But even beyond that, again, like we know Australian Survivor has wanted to bring back Tessa in the past, and I do feel like if she's able to, she would be someone that would probably want to play again, to where I don't think it's unreasonable to think that she would be on a season like this, or while she's probably on the lower side of things in terms of like legacy of the players that are on her tribe here, I do feel like she's still someone that would be deeply in consideration because I did put her on my list. Next up, for champions versus contenders, they consider a few people. I did actually consider Tegan as someone that I've always would have liked to see play again, though at the same time didn't really feel right for this cast. I did also consider Benji, who I would have put on had there been any inclination of him wanting to actually play again. However, it just feels like it's not really there, and to be honest, even then, like he's probably just bordering on the list here, so it's probably just better off to just leave him off anyway. I also considered Shawnee, who we've obviously already seen play 3 times, though I just didn't get the sense from Heroes vs. Villains that she really enjoyed her time out there, and while I don't necessarily think that we're never going to see Shawnee again, I do feel like seeing her back so soon seems kind of unlikely in my eyes, so I didn't put her on. And I also considered Sharn. Again, having the 2-time losing finalists on a season of this scale I think seems about right. However, I also don't really get the sense from Sharn that she would want to play again, and while there definitely would be a spot for her here, I just decided to leave her off. But the people I did pick from this cast, I mean, the first one's I think kind of a bit more obvious, and that person's Matt Rogers. I mean, clearly they would want Matt Rogers back. I mean, I believe he was in contention for Heroes vs. Villains, so I don't really see any reason why he wouldn't be in contention for this season, and I feel like for a season of this caliber, I could see them really going ham and propping up his Godfather title and matching him up to some of the legends of the game. So because I did put Matt Rogers on, and the other person I put on is probably the biggest question mark in terms of this AU cast here. I feel like this is the type of person that I don't even know if Australian Survivor would bring this person back. However, this is more so a personal choice, and that person is Jackie, who obviously got medevaced right away on Heroes vs. Villains, and I just want to see her again another chance. Now, realistically, do I think it'll go well? Maybe not. Now, again, she does very much feel like an outlier on this cast. I mean, when we eventually get to the full picture of this, I mean, this is a pretty stacked tribe of Australian Survivor players, and Jackie is for sure the smallest name of the bunch. Realistically, again, like I do think I could swap out Jackie for Sharn here, and I think it'll be fine. However, I did just feel like, again, I kind of want to see Jackie get another chance, so why not? We'll put her on the list here. Next up, for champions versus contenders 2, did have some considerations, particularly the likes of Janine, someone that we know has been asked back in the past, though I just don't really get the sense that Janine wants to play again that badly, to where, again, with the stacked field, I decided to leave her off, though realistically, again, she's another one that probably could be swapped out for Jackie. Also considered Abby, who was also in consideration. However, I just felt like there's other people in her archetype that I would prefer to see back more. Also considered Harry, who I think Harry's another one of these people like AK and like Nick, who has talked about not wanting to play again in the past, so I think he would be willing to play for a season like this. However, again, out of those 3, I did go with Nick. I feel like Nick, as the original superfan, feels more fit for a season like this than Harry, though Harry would have also been in consideration. Also considered the winner of the season in Pia, who again is another one. You can swap her out for Jackie. However, I just decided to give Jackie another chance here instead. But the one person from this season I did decide to bring back is David, who I think is almost a lock for a season like this. I feel like really anytime he wants to come back, he'll probably be back. Again, we know he was in the running for Heroes vs. Villains and the drop out the last second. I do feel like he is almost a lock for this season. I feel like it makes perfect sense. Again, I think at this point he is debatably the best player of Australian Survivor. I think to have him match up against the best quote unquote, of Survivor US, I do feel like is an interesting prospect. And I feel like David being on this cast just makes full sense. Next for Brains versus Braun, and here we also had a few considerations. I mean, I did consider the likes of someone like a Phil, a Joey, a Shannon. I mean, these earlier boots that I could see coming back if there was an Australian Survivor like second chance season or even the next All-Stars, though I think for a season like this, they do feel largely outclassed. Danny is someone I did consider, but again, didn't really quite fit the cast. Same thing goes with like a Flick, even though, again, do I need to see Flick again? Probably not. But the big consideration here that I didn't make it on was Haley, who was initially on my list here, and really was a debate between Haley and the last person we'll be talking about that made the list. However, I just feel like Haley's kind of accomplished what she's going to accomplish. I feel like we don't really need to see Haley play again. And also the fact that I don't know how incentivized Haley is to play again. I decided to just leave her off the list here. But the people I did put on the list, I mean, first up, you got to have George. And again, George, like David, to me, is the biggest lock on the board here. I don't know how they do a season like this without George. I feel like this is the type of season they would specifically want George on, to see George face off against the best from the US. I feel like that is exactly what they would want this season to be. And because I think George is pretty locked in for a cast like this. And also, we're bringing George back. Why not bring back Simon? And Simon was definitely a bit more of a question mark in my mind. Again, I think he kind of fights for a spot with certain other bro-y guys. But I just decided, again, the George Simon relationship would be great to see on a return, and even beyond that, I do very much expect Australian Survivor to bring him back at some point down the road, so why not bring him back here? Next for Blood vs. Water and considerations here, I mean, first up was Nina, who I just didn't decide to put on, largely because I just feel like it would be weird. As at that point, it's like, where do I put her? Do I put her on AU? Do I put her on USA? I think technically I'll put her on AU, but it would just be weird to have her on the AU tribe despite her being American. It would just be weird. I just left her off. Also considered Jordy, who I wouldn't be opposed to seeing play again. I do think he would be someone in consideration, though I do think the overall field here is pretty tough. And while I think you could argue him being swapped out for Simon, I just decided I'd kind of rather see Simon play again personally. Also considered someone like a KJ, who I personally wouldn't mind seeing play again. And again, another person that you could swap out with Jackie, though. Again, I just decided Jackie's second chance storyline was more interesting to me. Also considered Josh, who at this point is probably one of the best non-winning players in Australian Survivor, though he's also just kind of boring, and that's why he didn't really make it on. Even though I do think if we're just simply going on gameplay, I think he definitely would be interesting to see play again. And also I did consider Chrissy, who I think definitely would have been more in consideration for this list. I genuinely thought that Chrissy would want to play again. However, I don't really, and considering how bad of experience she had on Blood vs. Water, I just don't really expect her to want to play again. However, the people I did bring back here, first up is another one of the runner-ups, and that is Shay. Now, Shay is a person that, again, like also had a pretty bad experience like Chrissy, though I feel like Shay's probably just more willing to go through the experience once again. I do feel like she is someone that kind of fits with this cast a bit more, again, in the parallels that there are between this and the USA tribe. I do feel like I didn't need a bit more physical strength here, and I feel like Shay is a perfect person for that, while also being someone that made it very deep into the game. So again, I did put Shay on here. And the other person from this season I put on, the last guy to make the cast here, is one that really is here for diversity's sake. I do feel like Australian Survivor, now having done my first proper casting video for it, you could very much tell the struggle with diversity for this show, that there simply aren't that many POCs that you would expect to be interesting returnees. However, this is probably one of the most likely ones, and because I did put Khan on the cast. Now, Khan is someone that I believe was asked for Heroes vs. Villains and turned it down. I don't know how likely it would be that he would accept a season like this, but screw it. We're putting him on anyway. And Khan's someone that I personally would like to see back. I do think he has a lot of potential in the game, and I do feel like a season like this would just be really interesting to see him play in. So because of that, put Khan on the cast. And last up for Heroes vs. Villains. Truth be told, didn't have that many contenders, largely because most of the interesting people on that cast were returnees, though I did consider someone like a Matt, who I wouldn't be opposed to seeing play again, though it doesn't really fit into this cast. The person I did put on is the winner of the season in Liz. Now, again, I'm not 100% on if Liz would want to play again so quickly, though I did feel like I was still missing another like physical female player from Australian Survivor, and I was like, Liz just is the one that makes the most sense to me, of someone that would eventually come back, someone that would add to the legacy of the season, someone that would also still have an interesting dynamic with people that are on the season, with the likes of George and Simon. I do feel like Liz just feels right for this cast here, so despite qualms on whether or not she would come back, I did decide to put her on anyway. But there we go, that's the Australian Survivor side of things. Now let's get to the Survivor US. Now straight up, I'm not going to run through every single season, that would just take way too long. However, I will be running through the people that I did end up picking and talking about my reasons why, and going in order of when they first played. Let's start off with season 1, the original season, someone that I could very much see Australian Survivor picking, especially for a season like this. That person is Richard Hatch, the original winner. Now, obviously, Richard Hatch is someone that I don't expect to ever see on Survivor US ever again. And to be honest, even Australian Survivor is a bit finicky. However, I feel like if he were to come back, this is the season for it. I feel like for a USA tribe, I feel like having the original winner of the show makes a lot of sense. I can just imagine how much Australian Survivor would hype this up in the edit as well, to where I feel like Richard Hatch just fully makes sense in my mind. And the same thing goes with the next person we'll be talking about, who is someone that I'm genuinely shocked we haven't seen this person on Australian Survivor yet. This is a person that I fully expected to be on Here's Villains when we first heard the theme, and that person is Johnny Fairplay, where Fairplay has openly talked about how much he wants to play Australian Survivor. Again, he's not likely to come back for Survivor US due to his strained relationship with Jeff, and I just feel like as a whole, he feels like the perfect fit for Australian Survivor, feeling in lines with the Sandra and the Russells of these legendary players that have these big storylines you can set up here. I do feel like Australian Survivor editors could really just go ham with Fairplay, to where I just fully expect him to be on a season like this. Next up is a person that, straight up, if this was like a few years ago, this person wouldn't even be in contention, largely because I would just assume this person wouldn't be that interested. However, this person's largely come out of the woodwork recently and feels like a perfect Australian Survivor casting choice, and that person is Stephanie LaGrossa. Now again, Stephanie has openly talked about how she wants to play Survivor again. She did just recently play The Traitors, and also Snake in the Grass. Like, she seems to be all over the place in the reality TV sphere, to where, again, why not put her on Australian Survivor? Again, I think she adds to the legacy of this tribe. I think she adds to some physical strength to this tribe, even though she was also on the losingest tribe ever. But again, it should be fine. I think as a whole, Stephanie kind of fits in line with the type of people I would want on a tribe like this, because that she made it on. Next up, we're moving on to probably one of the people that I expect the most on a season like this. That person being a comrade of Stephanie, that person being Cirie. Now again, Cirie, same thing as Stephanie, as she has also been on The Traitors and Snake in the Grass recently, also has been very open wanting to play Survivor again, and I just feel like Australian Survivor feels about right. So while I do think Cirie might struggle early on Australian Survivor, I do feel like this is definitely a really interesting cast to put her in. I think she is one of the biggest names from Survivor US. Seeing her face off against the likes of a George or a David would just be pretty insane. I do feel like Cirie is one of the most likely people to be on this cast in my mind, so because that she made it on. Next up, a person that I don't even know if this person even knows Australian Survivor exists. However, he seems to be perfectly in line for Australian Survivor, that person being Ozzy. And again, Ozzy's another one, like kind of legend of the game, very notable figure, someone that I think Australian Survivor would want to really prop up in the edit as this challenge beast. And I feel like he kind of just fits with this cast. Again, I feel like he's the type of person that Australian Survivor would want for a season like this, and being this main anchor for the USA tribe in terms of challenges. And while Ozzy is getting a little bit older, I still feel like he definitely has it in him to face off against the likes of a David or a Simon or a Matt in challenges. Like, I feel like Ozzy kind of perfectly fits in line with this, also adding to the prestige of this group to where he easily made it on. But with that, we're jumping forward quite a bit, where again, Ozzy was on Cook Island season 13. We're now jumping all the way to Blood vs. Water season 27, where here I decided to put on Sierra. And this one was a bit tougher. I will say Sierra is probably the last person to make the cut for me, to where really she was fighting for this spot with a lot of other players. However, I feel like those players were players that were either unrealistic in terms of I don't think they would accept, or unrealistic in the sense that I don't think Australian Survivor would ask them. So I feel like Sierra is kind of the happy medium of that, to where, again, I don't think she's necessarily a lock here, but I do feel like she's the type of person that, again, has a big enough legacy for Australian Survivor would want her, while also herself is someone that I could see wanting to play Survivor again. Now, I do think Australian Survivor is a bit wonky, especially considering that very much does not play into Sierra's strong suits. I feel like Sierra is almost guaranteed to be a relatively early boot on a season like this. Though I do feel like there's also this aspect of, I could see Australian Survivor really hamming up how she voted out her mom. Mind you, I guess technically Nina did the same thing and they didn't do that for her. But again, that's Sierra's thing. I can already see it on a billion promos. And again, it kind of like also fits in with these parallels of the opposite tribe, to where I decided to go with Sierra here. But then we're moving on to the following seasons, Cagayan, where here I decided to bring back Tasha. Now, Tasha is someone that, again, was also a bit of a debate here, as Tasha hasn't been super present since her last appearance in Cambodia, though she has appeared on the Challenge USA, kind of out of nowhere. And if I were to guess, I would say she's willing to play Survivor again. However, I also don't feel like she's particularly likely to play Survivor US again. However, I feel like Australian Survivor kind of makes a bit more sense. I feel like I can definitely see Tasha making a cast of Australian Survivor, and I do feel like, again, to add diversity to the cast and also to add to these parallels between tribes, I feel like Tasha made perfect sense here. Next up, once again, moving on to the following season, here we do have another winner to add to the cast, this one being Natalie Anderson. And Natalie Anderson, if you asked me a few years ago, I would have said would have been a lock for a cast like this. I think immediately after Winners at War, I think she perfectly fit into what Australian Survivor would have been looking for, and these like really physical competitors that can also play the game really hard. And then she also like immediately did the challenge right after that. However, she's kind of gone a bit AWOL since then, where I feel like she hasn't been talked about in the running for any shows, though I do feel like a season like this makes perfect sense. Again, I think adding to the prestige of this cast to add another winner here also just feels like someone that I could definitely see them casting just in general. Like, I feel like Natalie Anderson feels about right for a cast like this. So again, I put her on. And with that, we're jumping forward one more season once again to the next winner of the show, and that is Mike Holloway. And Mike Holloway is someone that I don't know if he has any connection to Australian Survivor. However, I feel like if we're doing a USA tribe, I feel like Mike Holloway just perfectly fits in, right? I feel like Mike Holloway is what people probably stereotypically think of Americans. Him being this patriotic, all-American that also kind of brings what Australian Survivor would be wanting from him. Again, physicality and the fact that he's really good at challenges. Him also, again, playing the game hard, to a degree overplaying at points. Like, I feel like Mike kind of fits in line with what Australian Survivor would want, and I think considering the fact that he's been passed over by Survivor US multiple times at this point, I feel like Australian Survivor feels like the perfect spot for him. Next up, moving forward a few seasons now, but on to another winner, one that I know is a fan of Australian Survivor, and I decided to put him on. That person is Adam Klein. And again, Adam is someone that I think is still likely to come back for Survivor US. However, I feel like if Australian Survivor were to reach out to Adam, I could very much see him saying yes. And again, I think he adds to prestige of this cast, adding another winner. I think he also seems apt to do it. Again, I think he kind of fits in this parallel between him and Nick as these two super fans on both tribes. Like, I just feel like Adam kind of like perfectly fits into this cast here. For a while, there were other people in a similar archetype to him that were in consideration. I did feel like Adam kind of felt like the one that bolstered the legacy of this cast the most, and because that he made it on. Next up, moving on to a few seasons later for last woman to make the cast here, and this one might be a little bit more random. Again, not this massive legend of the game, but I do think it's someone that has recently gone to Australian Survivor, and I do think also is like at the perfect caliber I could see Australian Survivor trying to get, and that person is Kellen. Now, realistically, do I think Kellen kind of fits in with Australian Survivor? Not really. However, I did want to add more players over from more recent seasons, where straight up, this list here ends up not including many recent players. I decided to not include anyone from the new era, mainly because I don't know what the contractual obligations for those are, plus also, I just feel like they're more likely to come back for Survivor US. However, I feel like Kellen is kind of on the border of everything, to where I think it's been a while since her season in Survivor US, but also is still recent enough to where I think she kind of fits into both camps. However, I feel like her likelihood of coming back for Survivor US is kind of going down as time goes on, to where why not? Screw it. Let's put her on Australian Survivor. Especially considering her recent fandom in the show, I felt like she felt like a decent enough pick here. And finally, the final person we're going to pick on Australian Survivor here is someone that I did debate on, because I do think this person is still somewhat likely to come back for Survivor US. However, I also have no doubt in my mind that if he was asked to do Australian Survivor, that he would say yes, and that person is Rick Devens. Again, the most recent person on the board here, and I just feel like Rick Devens is probably just saying yes whenever he's asked. I mean, I would just be surprised if Rick Devens said no to a chance to play Survivor again, especially considering how active he is online and how he's played these other games. I just feel like Rick Devens just seems like a pretty locked in pick in my eyes for a season like this. And would also, again, add to the legacy of the cast, and would also just be an interesting player to see attempt to play Australian Survivor. And I could see his overall gameplay style clashing with certain other players that are on his tribe, particularly the likes of like an Ozzy and a Richard Hatch, that I think could be interesting as well. So again, I think overall Rick Devens feels like an interesting pick here for me, and because that he made it onto the cast. But there we go. I mean, that's my cast for Australian Survivor, Australia versus USA. On the Australian tribe, I do have Nick and Christy from season 1, Tessa and Sam from season 2, Matt and Jackie from season 3, David from season 4, George and Simon from season 6, Shay and Khan from season 7, and Liz from season 8. On the US side of things, I do have Richard Hatch, Johnny Fairplay, Stephanie LaGrossa, Sheree Fields, Ozzy Luce, Sierra Easton, Tasha Fox, Natalie Anderson, Mike Holloway, Adam Klein, Kellen Bechtold, and Rick Devins. So there we go. I mean, that's the video. I mean, down the road, I would like to do more casting videos for Australian Survivor, though I can just find time on the schedule for them. It's a bit difficult. But I did feel like this was a theme that I personally felt like it was the most interesting to do right away. But obviously, just in general, just expect similar type of videos down the road. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.